Good morning and welcome to Helston Baptist Church Online. We're very glad that you're here with us this morning, and we hope that you're going to enjoy yourself as you watch our talk in a minute. This is the sermon part of the service that you'll be seeing. We do a lot more than the sermon. There's all sorts of other stuff goes on at church, and if you're local and you're watching us online and you're thinking, I'd like to see the other stuff, well, why not come along? The details are on Facebook and on the website. And we meet pretty much every Sunday at 10:30 at the Coldrose Community Centre. You'd be very welcome to come along. You have the advantage that you have already seen us, so there's less to worry about when you come. And for now, we're going to watch the sermon part of the service. This is the Bible talk, where we open up God's Word, try and explain it so we understand it, see what it says to us. And so it's a big help in our lives. So we hope you enjoy this morning's video. Thanks for joining us.
In a moment, I'm going to ask Trina to come up and read for us. In this passage, the same thing happens 3 times, and I find it really, really comforting. 3 times, the disciples, despite the fact that they've been with Jesus for 3 years, day and night, 3 times they completely miss the point of what's going on, and they're not fired. And I find this hugely helpful. That God, Jesus does not give up on them. I find that there's an enormous amount of relief involved with that. After all, how often have you felt confused? How often have you completely forgotten really important things that you were supposed to remember in your faith, and then taken a wrong turn, and then you can't for the life of you work out how you managed to forget such important things? Have you ever read a Bible passage repeatedly and got to the end and not had a clue? Or got to the end and realised you've been writing a shopping list in your head while you were ostensibly reading the Bible passage, and so on and so forth. And before we read this reading, I just want us to notice Jesus does not give up on people like that. He doesn't put them down, which is good news. So from that position of assurance and comfort, we know that we can keep on trying, keep on persevering, keep on picking ourselves up, and grow in our understanding. And in the light of that, I'm going to ask Trina to come and read for us. Thank you, Trina.
Today's reading is taken from Luke chapter 22, beginning at verse 24. If you can't hear me, now's the time for your hand up. A dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. Jesus said to them, The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is the greater, the one who is at the table, or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom that just as my Father conferred one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. But he replied, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death. Jesus answered, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me. Then Jesus asked them, When I sent you without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? Nothing, they answered. He said to them, But now, if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. It is written, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And I tell you, this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. The disciples said, See, Lord, here are 2 swords. That's enough, he replied.
So 3 misunderstandings, and here's a thread that might tie those 3 in each paragraph. They just don't get what Jesus said. They don't get what's going on. They don't understand what they've been told all this time. And I think if there is a thread that might tie those three misunderstandings together, it could be this. It is that we default to a tendency to think that the kingdom works like the rest of life and work and culture. We tend to think or assume, if we don't stop ourselves, that the kingdom, the church, works like the rest of life and work and culture and the way things work around us. And especially here is, and this is a very 20th, 21st century thing especially, that success comes with using our own resources, our own expertise, our own strength and our own perspective. That's it's the thing that we default to if we don't stop ourselves, that somehow what God has called us to works the same way as everything else, and that's not how it is. And you can look through history and see how the church has done this. There have been times where success has been, well, we'll use military might, and that's using the systems of the world to promote the church. Well, the church works like everything else, we'll just get a bigger army than everyone else. Or we will adopt the philosophies of our time. They seem to be working, so we'll do something similar. Or 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s and 90s, we'll adopt the marketing practices of our time. That will grow the church and the kingdom, and so on and so forth. So we borrow from the world because we think the church and the kingdom works the same way. So we use those techniques, our own resources, our own expertise, our own strength to make things go really well. But the disciples learn here that's not how the kingdom works. The kingdom works differently, whether we like it or not. And we can have a look through their misunderstandings to see how different kingdom life is, and to try and remind ourselves again and again that the kingdom and the church and the Christian life doesn't work the same way as all the other systems that are in place in the world around us. So let me see if I can make that clear as we go through. So 3 things I think they misunderstand. So number 1, the disciples misunderstand the dynamics of life in the kingdom. They misunderstand the dynamics of how life works in the kingdom of God. This is verses 24 to 28, and this argument that they have. And the first thing to ask is, how do they end up having this argument? Jesus has just, as we heard last time, given them communion, the Lord's Supper. He's explained that his body is going to be broken, his blood is going to be shed, that one of them is going to betray him. It's a deeply profound moment for everybody. And within seconds, they're arguing and they're having a competition about which of them is the most accomplished Christian, which is the most accomplished disciple, and who's going to be the boss disciple that everybody else is going to have to obey and follow. You're saying, well, how does that happen? How can they possibly do that? We'd never do that. Well, maybe there's 2 things here maybe that happens. The first is maybe it's an escalation. I imagine that when Jesus says to them, one of you is going to betray me, they start to establish their credentials as not being the betrayer by getting out their CVs and pointing out how good they are. So I'm so good, it couldn't possibly be me. And then you know what happens when you start doing that in any context. Once people start saying how good they are at something, how long they work at something, how hard they've worked at something, how much they've suffered to achieve, everybody else joins in, because you don't want to be way down the league table, do you? So you want to keep yourself up. You can see how that might have started and got out of hand, and they literally forgot what they just heard about Jesus dying. But secondly, maybe it's just the human condition. We tend to feel good when we believe that others see us as good. You know? We feel good about ourselves when we believe that we've made other people feel good about us. That's why we want the last word. We want to be the person with the funniest joke or the most devastating remark. We want to be the most expert at things, the fastest, the strongest, the most attractive, the most accomplished, the most spiritual. It's a tendency that we have as people. If we can convey how good we are, and we believe that other people can see how good we are, then we don't feel so bad about ourselves and we feel good about ourselves. That's a multi-layered issue. But Jesus develops it in one direction for one point. He says, you big yourself up in order to get authority over other people, to boss them around. That's the problem. That's what he's saying here. They say, which one of us is the best? And Jesus goes into a discussion saying, look, the leaders of the people outside of the kingdom, they lord it over them. And those in authority over them are called benefactors. He's saying that what we do when we big ourselves up is try and say, I should have influence over you. I should have authority. You should do what I say. It happens at school from square one, doesn't it? When you've got to pick out a team. I'm so glad those days are over. When you could be, particularly when you're me, I wasn't the last, but I was usually second to last to get picked. So you have, I was trying to get last. I couldn't even succeed at that. You have, everybody's going, you want to be, I don't know what happens in girls' teams, but we were completely segregated. I don't even know if you're still segregated. But in the boys' teams, it was pick me, I'm this good, I'm that good, I can do this, he's rubbish, he's terrible. You big yourself up and you put others down in order to gain a position of influence. And then when you grow up, you find people are still doing it. Wait till the next general election. There's going to be hordes of educated, well-off people running our country saying how good they are and how rubbish everyone else is in order to gain authority. And between those 2 points is the mass of humanity. It's what we do. Here are 11 people left in the upper room once Judas leaves. And these 11 people are going to be the first leaders of the first church. And in the end, it says in verse 30, they're going to eat and drink at Jesus' table in the kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. They're going to be deeply influential people. We're still following their leadership today. And Jesus says, you will not be like that. You will not act that way. That is not how it works. He's pretty clear here. Not so with you. Don't do it that way. So pack it in. The kingdom works differently. It doesn't work like the systems around us, where bigging yourself up is the way to get authority, and lording it over people is the way to prove that you have authority. These people were called benefactors, which is a bit ironic, isn't it? Leaders who had stomped their way to the top and then threw out a few breadcrumbs to the ordinary masses, and the ordinary masses were supposed to be grateful and saying how great they were and virtuous these leaders were. Benefactors. Do the same now. Leaders, celebrities, influencers, they throw breadcrumbs out to us ordinary people, and we bow before their awesomeness. We don't do that. Really? How many people have you seen with selfies stood next to some minor celebrity looking as though they've made it? What are we trying to do? We're trying to say how good how far we've got. They don't know who we are. You're the 800th person today they've had a selfie with. They have no idea who you are. And people bow before them. Jesus says, not in the kingdom. In the early church, if you come along on a Sunday morning, early in the morning, and a nobleman was a Christian, and their servant was a Christian, and they both came into church, when they got into church, it was entirely possible, and this happened, that the servant was an elder and leader of the church, and the nobleman wasn't. And their positions were reversed. Because in the kingdom, that's not how it works. You can come in with all your grand stuff, and that's great. Maybe you've worked hard to get to the top. Maybe you're a great person. But when you come into the church, that's not how you measure things. And somebody who normally was cleaning out the outside toilets at your villa was now in a position of authority in the church, because the necessities of being in that position were measured differently. Jesus says that's how it's going to be. You cannot act in the way that the world acts. Why not? Because the church is modelled on Jesus. What does he say in verse 27? Who is the greater? The one who reclines at the table. Remember when people went to expensive dinner parties, they didn't sit on chairs, they lay down on couches. The one reclining, who's the greatest? The one reclining or the one waiting on the table? Well, obviously, not your waiter. The one reclining at table is the greater. And Jesus says, I just washed your feet. I've just told you I'm going to die for you. Who is the greatest here? Jesus is the greatest, the most glorious, the most famous, or will be, in the world. Certainly already in heaven at this point. The most successful person, because all his plans will come true. The most powerful, the Son of God. He was the Word at the beginning of creation. The Lion of Judah is returning on the clouds of heaven, and he's just washed the feet of his disciples, and he's going to permit himself to be executed as a criminal. And he says that is the standard. That is the measure of greatness. That is the level that you're aiming at. It's not that what you are outside of the church may not be of great use in the kingdom, but we don't have the same way of measuring greatness inside the kingdom as outside the kingdom. It's a different pattern. Here's the thing. The kingdom is a revolutionary system. The church should be a revolutionary community where our concept of greatness and of heroism and of who should be influencing us is overturned. Who is the greater? The one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at table? But I am among you as the one who serves. The greatest is the servant. What does that mean? It means three things at least here. Number one, it means by implication, he's saying you don't go around lording it over other people. The church isn't a place where you say, I'm going to tell people what to do. The greatness in the kingdom is of those who care. That's what verse 26 is saying to us. Not so with you. Let the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as the one who serves. You don't lord it over people, you care for people. Secondly, you don't act like you're great and everyone else is deficient in the way that you do to get into a football team at school, or the next general election all the politicians are going to be doing to get into government. He says you need rather the humility of youth. Now, or possibly that's not a phrase that springs to mind quite as quickly as it might have done in Jesus' time. But what he's saying there is the humility of youth is that you must recognise, you act as the one who recognises you are not great. You're the one who recognises you've got a lot to learn. You're the one who recognises you've got a long way to go. You don't come in and become great over other people. You come in as the one who is humble. And you don't come in, thirdly, and demand authority, but you come in and you serve. I am the one who serves you. How does greatness get bestowed on you in the kingdom? Jesus doesn't say here, well, you've all done great things. You've all done great achievements. You've all got great gifts. Therefore, you are great. He says in verse 28, before he says he's going to give them a kingdom, he says, you are those who have stayed with me in my trials. Faithfulness. Jesus says faithfulness is a sign of greatness in the kingdom. Humility, service, faithfulness. So that's how it's going to work. Who do you get to choose to be influential over you? Humility, service, faithfulness. Now that's humbling for us because it's not how we think naturally, generally, but it's really good news. If you have or do work or live in a situation which is fairly brutal and competitive and jostling and only the strong survive and people run petty kingdoms in your ordinary life, then the kingdom of God, the church, is a safe place for you. It should not, cannot work that way here. You're not going to be trodden on in order to big somebody else up. So this morning you could be a genius rock star astronaut, all three things. Or you could be somebody whose job is to wipe tables in a cafe. And your basis for being here is exactly the same. You're here because of grace and forgiveness. You're here because you're on a level playing field. You are more lost, or were more lost than you could possibly imagine. And you're more loved than you could ever conceive of. And that's why you're here today. You might feel very unimpressive out in the world. You might be somebody that other people don't notice. You might be second to last when they're picking a team. You might be very quiet. But the kingdom does not revere loudness and forcefulness. It doesn't revere pushing yourself forward and pushing others down. It reveres humility and service and faithfulness and endurance, and all of that is in your reach to be a great person. And the good news is this is greatness that lasts forever. Verses 28 to 30 says there's going to be a kingdom that lasts forever. All this stomping around and making a noise that we have to put up with now, one day it'll be seen for what it is. And it won't count for anything. But the thing that you do quietly, that no one else sees, and you don't even tell somebody else about maybe, that goodness, that kindness, that sacrifice, that service, that's going to endure. Always. It'll never be lost. In Revelation it says that the faithful are resting from this life and their works follow them. It'll never be forgotten because it's measured and kept by God. Maybe you're nobody out there. Maybe we're all nobodies out there. But in here, it doesn't matter. Because here, the greatness that lasts forever is faithfulness to Jesus, and you can all of us can get a hold of that. So let's don't miss the point that they missed. The church is not a religious version of your workplace or the media or sport or any institution. The workplace is different. This is a revolutionary community powered by humility and service. Number one, they misunderstand the dynamics of how the kingdom works. Number two, verses 31 to 34, they misunderstand how frail we are. Verse 33, Peter says, Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. And we wince because we know where this is going. He's going to fail. Peter's claim is almost all self-confidence and an awful lot of frailty. Have you ever boasted something big and it just doesn't happen? It might be out there, it might even be a spiritual thing. And we say this, and it doesn't happen. It goes wrong. See, Peter has misjudged something. He's misunderstood something. It's easy for all of us to do. He's misunderstood something internal and something external. The thing that he's missed internally is fear will undermine your best intentions. I don't doubt that Peter was very sincere in what he just said, but he had not measured that up against the fear that was coming in a few hours' time, and it just cut the power to his best intentions. We need to be realistic about that. We are frail people, and our emotions sometimes will catch us out. Fear and other things will bypass our rational thinking, what we know to be true, our trust in the future because of God's past faithfulness to us. We'll just go out the window and we'll make a mistake. Because we're all frail. There isn't a person here that hasn't happened to. I'll guarantee it now, absolutely. Because you're sat there thinking, some of you, that's happened to me. Why am I not like the other people in this church? Here's your good and bad news. You're exactly like all the other people in this church. They've all done it. We've all boasted. We've all thought we're going to be all right. We've stood out. We haven't realised how frail we are. That's the internal thing. The external thing is spiritual warfare. Simon, Simon, verse 31. Behold, Satan has demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. Now, in some translations, it looks like Jesus is only talking about Peter. I noticed in Trina's translation, they make it clear that in this verse, all the pronouns are plural in the original Greek. It's singular in the next one when he just addresses Simon. But in this one, it's everybody. It's not that Satan simply desires to pick out one person and give him a hard time. He's going to pick out all of them and give them a hard time. No one is exempt. What's going on here and what we tend to do is see the big issues of our life, the troubles that we face, as the battle. Satan doesn't see that as a battle. He sees that as the battlefield where he can wage a deeper war in the troubles that we face, to discourage us and break us down, to cause spiritual damage. The big things that you're probably facing something right now. You know, difficulties in your family, difficulties at work, difficulties in your health. And that seems to be the battle. It is a battle. But Satan sees it as something more. He sees it as a battlefield to wage this other battle. To not only has your trouble in your life, but to spiritually damage you. And Peter didn't see that. You know, what's worse? That your plans go wrong, your hopes go wrong, or your plans and hopes go wrong and you're spiritually wrecked. See, that's the other battle. Verse 31, he uses Job-type language. Satan has demanded to sift you. Have you ever been sifted? Peter's going to be, he's going to have a big sieve, and Peter and his faith are going to be put in that sieve, and Satan is going to violently shake that sieve, like with the pressure of one of those jackhammers. And Satan's hope is that Peter's faith will just crumble to pieces, fall through the sieve, and when you look, there's nothing left. You ever felt like that? You ever felt like the events that are happening to you are a giant sieve that are knocking 7 bells out of your faith and assurance in God that you're going to be okay, that things will be okay? If you haven't, then you're a Christian. It's coming. It's going to happen, I'm sorry. All the pronouns are plural. And it's a frightening thought. But here's 2 upsides to realising what Jesus is telling Peter. Number 1, if we listen to Jesus, we have a fuller view of reality. It's no longer just the things that are hitting us, it's the battle behind it. We can be aware of it. Satan can't sneak around if we're aware that he's there. The enemy is no longer invisible. We see how big the stakes are. And secondly, we realise that we need help to win. We're too frail to do this on our own. When you fall, when you fail as a Christian, when you drift, how do you feel? When you realise, when you as the younger son sat in the pigsty, came to himself. We have that experience, don't we? Hang on, why did I do this? How did I get here? And then how do you feel?
So at that point, the camera stopped working as well. So not only was I losing my voice, but the technology all went off too. So we're going to carry on from where we left off, hopefully. So how do we feel when we fail, when we fall, when we drift? Peter was crushed And I guess he thought it was all over. You know, he's not really a Christian. And that's a frightening thought. But there's also, in this passage, we do see a big difference between Judas and Peter. And we shouldn't get confused between the two. Judas, it seems to me, never really had a genuine faith. He had his own agenda, which he was pursuing. He was thinking about himself, because we know from John's Gospel that he was swiping money out of the poor box all the way through. And when Jesus failed to satisfy that agenda, he rejected him and took another route. Peter is different from that. He's self-confident, he's impetuous, he thinks he's always right. But it's not that he throws Jesus under the bus, he just hides because he's frightened. Peter's flame never goes out, and Jesus' care for him never stops. So we need to think about it perhaps in that way. And Jesus will, of course, restore him. Now, right here it says that Jesus prays for him. That's his care expressed here. He knows that Peter is frail. He knows that he's going to let him down. But his love is not diminished by foreknowing Peter's denial of him. I know some people whose prayers, and don't ask me to explain this because I can't, but some people's prayers seem to be answered far more often than other people's. And I know that if I ask that person to pray for me, I just feel more confident. I know things are going to happen. Well, in this instant, Jesus is praying for Peter, for those who are frail. And Jesus' prayers are always heard. So this is a great thing. You know, and I don't fully understand either what it means that about the present intercession of Christ, which you sometimes hear about. But we know that in Romans 8, it says that the one who could have condemned us, it does not condemn us, but he intercedes for us. So I think we should be confident in Jesus' love for us, even in these times where we know that we have failed. And you know what? The content of Jesus' prayer for Peter isn't, well, may all the trials that Peter's facing just disappear before they arrive. What he prays for is that Peter's faith does not fail. And of course that prayer was answered. Things still happened to Peter and he still fell over. But his flame never went out. And after the resurrection, Jesus restores him. And we know that Peter gains through this. If you look at 1 Peter 1:3-7, and here is Peter much later in life reflecting on issues of grace and mercy. He's saying that in heaven there is kept for us by God this reward, who is also guarding us. And that our trials will produce a faith that is better than gold. Our future is kept. Jesus guards us right now, and our faith becomes gold through our trials. And that's important because then we see also that failure as a Christian is not necessarily final. What we find here is that Jesus says that in verse 32, when you have turned, go and strengthen your brothers. When you are restored, take yourself off and minister to other people. This trial, this sifting, this fall and then this restoration will be used by Jesus to strengthen others. You know, in the world, in the systems that we live with every day, it's the ones who have no frailty, or at least claim they have no frailty, who become influential and lead. But in the kingdom, it is not those who have no wounds, it is those whose wounds are filled with grace and minister from those wounds to others who have the deepest influence. Suffering will often have one of two effects. One is that it will harden us and make us more angry. The other is that it softens our hearts, it weakens our pride and self-sufficiency. It creates more empathy for those who are also suffering. And it allows us to understand and to care, and it gives us more wisdom. And Peter ministers for decades from this place of restoration and grace from his failure. Maybe you're feeling sifted now. And maybe like Peter, you can't see to the other side of these trials. He certainly couldn't, but Jesus could. And he could see how they could be used. Jesus knew that it was not be wasted. So don't miss the point here. We are frail people who are dependent people. But failure is not final. It doesn't have to be. And it never has to be wasted. And finally, we can misunderstand what would work in our days. There's a movement now who would say to everything that I've said this morning, well, that was fine 50 years ago, but things are different now. It's tough times. We have opposition. We're maligned. It's militant. We need to get tough with people. We need to do the same things back. These things haven't really changed. We're not really in a new situation. Verses 35-38, Jesus is saying to them, look, you were in a more positive situation and now you're not going to be. You know, In chapters 9 and 10, you went out, your mission trips were basically safe, people were glad to see you, they provided for your needs. You know, you didn't really need to think about it too much. And he's saying that now, everything's going to change. He is going to be executed as a criminal, as an enemy of the state, essentially. Suddenly, things are going to get way, way harder. Now, by the way, this thing in verse 36 about swords and all that, I think that's metaphorical. I think that's proverbial. I don't think it can be literal. Jesus saying, hey, what you need is a couple of swords to fight. And then just a few verses later, when they attack the servant and cut his ear off, I don't know what they're aiming for, but they cut his ear off. Jesus says, that's enough of that. Pack that in. That's not what we do. And of course, on other occasions, he said before Pilate, you know, if my kingdom was of this world, then people would fight. But it's not of this world, so they don't. You know, and also, it doesn't make any sense. There's 11 of them, plus Jesus, and a huge mob's coming towards them that are armed. 2 swords, that's enough. That's not going to be enough. So I don't think Jesus thinks this is, I don't think Jesus is saying to us, this is a literal arm yourselves. I think he's saying, look, things are going to get tough. And I think you can see this because actually the thing at the end where he says that's enough, and it might sound in some translations like 2 swords, that'll be enough. I think the other way of reading it is he's saying times are going to be tough. And they say, we've got 2 swords. He said, oh, that's enough. It's one of those times where they're just missing the point. The disciples have missed the point. And so the point is, actually, even though the times have changed, we still need to be what Jesus has just told us. He knew this change was coming. And he tells us to be a revolutionary community of humility and service and grace, and to minister through our wounds, not go around causing them. You know, as Christians and as the church, we've had, 300 years of privilege, some parts of the church, acceptability, access to places, entrance. You know, there was a time when, if you remember the clergy, it got you all sorts of privileges. I tell you, that's all gone. Things have changed. But the missions and the methods stay the same. What he's saying here, I think, is bear in mind how tough it's going to be, not adopt their methods. The gospel is still our power. You know, in verse 37, he quotes Isaiah and says, you know, he's going to be numbered with the transgressors. If you go back to Isaiah and read the whole sentence, it says, numbered with the transgressors, yet he bore the sins of many. The gospel of a crucified Saviour will be more believable if we look like we believe it, if we look like him. Let's not miss the point here. The goodness of the gospel is sufficient for our times. It is the power for all times. You know, when I was a young Christian, I would be in meetings and stuff, and or in conversations, and people would often say, Alan, you know, or to the group, you mustn't do it in your strength, you must do it in God's strength. And everyone would nod sagely, and I would nod sagely, and I'd think, am I the only one here who has absolutely no idea what that means? I have no idea what that means in practice. It sounds good. So one of those things about missing the point, here's the big lesson is, ask questions. It's the only way. Anyway, let me give you at the end here just this thought. To do things in God's strength and not ours is at least, as we've learned from this passage, to approach things with humility, not pride. To come at things with service and not lord it over others. To acknowledge our frailty and not pretend we're invincible. To joyfully recognise that Jesus is keeping us and guarding us. And in tough times, trust his ways, not human ways. And into that intentional openness, that kind of lived profession of need for him, I think he steps with his strength. Thanks for listening. Sorry about the voice. Sorry about the technical troubles. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for your gospel. Lord, there might be all kinds of folk watching this morning who just need to know that their failure is not final, and to know that the gospel is enough. Please assure our hearts of this. Help us to know how to be in you. In Jesus' name. Amen. See you next time.